Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. We're talking to some other Mormons. This is from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Strangite, up in Wisconsin. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Gary Weber. He's a member of that church there. We're going to talk about James Strang's polygamy, baptism for the dead, and also they've got an interesting take on the stick of Judah. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Because initially he was against polygamy, and then was it part of the Book of the Law of the Lord where he said polygamy was okay? Is that right?
As we know in the Book of Mormon, polygamy's always been part of God's structure, but it's always when he demands it or commands it. You know, it says in the Book of Jacob, in the Book of Mormon, it says you should only have one wife unless I command you otherwise to build up seed unto my name. And so that's why Abraham and all them, they practice polygamy. But it's like with King David and King Solomon, they kind of ran it into the ground where they had more wives than they could take care of.
Right.
And so, and on the island, James was inspired that God wanted them to practice polygamy, but they were only to take as many wives as what they could support comfortably. So most of them could not. I think they said there was only like out of the thousands of members over there, maybe 5 families practiced polygamy because they couldn't really afford anymore, or maybe their wives weren't really keen on it, because that is also part of the law that if your wife objects to it, then you have to honor that.
Okay. So
we don't practice it now.
So you still believe it's an eternal principle?
We believe that if God commands you to practice polygamy, that it is okay with God. I mean, Abraham was one of the most righteous men there was, and he practiced polygamy. So it just depends on why God wants it to be done, to build up children in his church, but it's not for lustful persons to gratify men. That's not God's purpose.
Do you have a position on the polygamists in Utah and Arizona that practice polygamy? Because I guess they would argue that God commanded them to practice.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
They have to, everyone has the right to believe as they wish, and they feel like it's what they're supposed to do, then I got no problem with it. But it is against the law, and Joseph Smith said, we believe in keeping the laws of the land. And so really hardly anybody in the Strangite Church really ever practiced polygamy, particularly after they left the island.
All right.
No one ever practiced it again. And just like I said, very few did. But I know that the Reorganites are against polygamy.
Mm-hmm.
And young Joseph, he went to Utah to ask these women, that were claiming to be his father. You guys are claiming that you were married to my father. And so he wanted to talk to person when he went to Utah to say, were you really married to my father? Because my mother says that he never practiced polygamy. And so I don't know what to believe. All these people are saying that he did. But the thing about that is that there's no children from Joseph Smith. So that seems kind of odd. And and then he was actually cutting people off from the church. It's in church history. And Mr. Brown, about 3 months before he died, he cuts off this Mr. Brown from the church for practicing and teaching polygamy. So there seems to be kind of an inconsistency.
Strang cut off Brown?
Oh, no, Joseph did. 3 months before he died. At Nauvoo.
Okay.
And there's many things in the times and seasons where they talked about that anybody that practices or teaches polygamy would be cut off.
Okay. So you had to do it in an authorized way.
Yeah. I mean, we believe that only a prophet can usher in a dispensation for polygamy.
Okay.
And if it's against the law, we don't believe that God would really truly put people in a position to break the law and maybe go to jail.
Okay.
That's our position on that.
Okay. Okay.
But the general principle of it, we understand that it can be of God if that's what he deems necessary at that time, as he has done in the Bible and in certain places.
Okay. So I understand, we went by the White River yesterday, that's pretty close to the Hill of Promise, right?
Yeah.
And so baptisms for the dead were also performed in the White River.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your beliefs about baptism for the dead?
Well, we believe that only a prophet can usher in a dispensation for baptism of the dead. He's got to get the keys from Elijah. And Joseph Smith got the keys from Elijah, and so did James Strang, we believe. And so they practiced it. I don't know how extensively, because they took all the records from Voree to Beaver Island, and when they run off the island, they weren't able to get all of the records because they were hastily got off the island, and they were very lucky that they got the printed. The book of law was being printed at that time, and they were just in unbound sheets that had been printed, and women stuffed them in their petticoats, and they got as many pages as each woman could get. And then when they got later into Wisconsin, Illinois, living with family, they would write each other and say, I have pages 1 through 20, and so I hear has 21 through 40, or whatever the amount does. And so they put it all together. But one of the neat things about it is that James must have known that something like this was going to happen. So he marked every page with exactly how many letters was on each page that he printed. And so when they put it all together, they could see that it was in its pure form, that hadn't been tampered with, that it all matched up with how many pages and how many words and characters was on each page. And so they printed it, and it's been reprinted over the years.
And so this is the revelation for baptism for the dead? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's the book of law.
The book of the law.
But it does have a section in there on the doctrine of
baptism.
The baptism for the dead. And it's identical to what Joseph Smith did, and information he put out, which is in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. There's a section on baptism for the dead. And so that the only difference between Strangs and the Utah Mormons is that we believe that it doesn't matter what the sex is of the person. A woman could be baptized for the dead for her father if he was died and hadn't been baptized yet. Whereas in the Utah church, it's women can baptize for women, men can baptize for men. That's the only difference. Other than that, it's identical.
So, but you don't practice baptism for the dead anymore?
No, because we have no prophet on the earth at this time. We're waiting for the next prophet of the house of Judah to come forth. And then it tells in Genesis 49, when Jacob blesses his 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, when it talks about Judah, it says, the lawgiver shall not depart between the feet of Judah. So once the stick of Ephraim, Joseph Smith, finished his ministry, there was to be, right after him, to be a prophet of the stick of Judah, of the tribe of Judah, that would bring forth the book of the law. And then this next prophet is going to remain in the house of Judah, the tribe of Judah from King David. And he's going to take the gospel, as I said before, to the house of Israel.
Well, very good. And so, trying to decide where to go next. I guess the other place that I want to talk about is we went out to, you call it the Trust Farm or something like that. But there was a location for the temple, that James Strang, I guess did they lay the cornerstone? Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's over by the White River as well.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure which side of the river it's on. There was that pictorial that someone made. It wasn't James, or it was way later.
Okay.
As I said, that was put up by the Watson family, and someone drew that pictorial, and it's got where the temple's supposed to be, but it's really kind of hard to tell when you're looking at it, if you're north or south or east west of the river. And so we don't really know. There's no...
Oh, you don't have an official site.
We don't know where it's been lost, of where it was. I know the Watson granddaughters, when they were out on the trust farm, they said that they remember seeing the stone footings that were laid for the temple, kind of like at Independence, they laid the cornerstone.
Okay.
It was similar to that. And you can see the Tower of Strength, the foundation of that, but it later, it was tore down by the Gentiles.
Okay.
But over time, if people don't really mark things and listen to the people that were from back in the past, you lose where it was at and stuff like that. So now we don't really know.
Okay.
Exactly. We know the vicinity, but not the exact location.
Because it seems like, at least from my memory, is that the Strangites were going to have some sort of a temple ceremony, kind of like the LDS endowment, I believe.
Not during my lifetime.
No, but in James Strang's lifetime.
Yeah, that could be.
Okay.
I'm not
you don't
real
know
familiar with that.
Okay. I know Cheryl Bruno has done some work, because it sounded like it had some Masonic influences, but it was called the Order of the Illuminati or something like that. But you don't know a lot about that.
Yeah, I know that there's been claims that he organized the Illuminati, but that's something that's not really been proven. There's not really anything that he wrote about that. As other people wrote that said that he was in this Illuminati organization or whatever.
Okay.
But a lot of the Mormons were members of the Masons.
Right.
Joseph Smith was a Mason. James Strang was a Mason. And from what I understand, well, the main objective then, it's not today, because I know Masons today, was they were trying to keep the Catholics out of the presidency and out of politics. They were afraid of the Pope and the Catholic influence. That was the main thing that initially the Masons were all about. That's what I've read.
Okay.
About that.
Okay. So, but the temple was never built.
That was never finished. I'm sure they dedicated it here in Voree and Burlington, and also at Beaver Island, but they were never finished.
Okay. Well, that was my next question. How long was James here in Voree/Burlington until he went to Beaver Island? Do you know?
He lived here before it was established, probably maybe like in 1842 or something like that. He came into this area, and they were in the Voree area probably till like 1949, 50, something like that.
1849.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And then they went to Beaver Island about 1850-ish.
Okay.
And they were there till 1856, and they run off the island.
Okay. Oh, and because he was shot, can you talk a little bit about his time on Beaver Island? What were the reasons why people were upset with him, and then
he was against people that were trying to sell liquor to the Indians, or even to the Saints for that matter. And so he kind of put a prohibition on the sale of alcohol on Beaver Island. And he was the mayor or the king, whatever you want to call him. But it was only
he was both mayor and king, right?
But only through his priesthood.
Okay.
I mean, he wasn't. They were still part of the legislation of Michigan, They owned the islands. They were under their jurisdiction. So it was only through this acknowledgement of his priesthood as being a king, which Joseph Smith also was a king through his lawgivership,
right?
But not a king of the United States or anything like that,
right?
Kind of like Christ. He goes, "My kingdom is of is in heaven, not on the earth."
Yeah.
And so, but anyways, he was there from about 1849 in Beaver Island till he was killed in 1856, and he was brought here, which I showed you his parents' house there, across from the White River, and he lived there for a couple of weeks, and he died.
Yeah, so the bullet didn't kill him right away. It took a few weeks for him to die.
Right.
And so it's interesting to me, because I guess he had time to call a successor, but he chose not to.
Yeah, the next successor is not till right years before Christ comes. It wasn't time to start the House of Israel's dispensation to the Jews. There was going to be this interregnum period of time, so there wasn't supposed to be another prophet after him. We have to wait till God can punish the Jews and get them humble and ready to receive Christ, and then that's his mission, is to get them to realize that they killed their Christ.
Okay. And so so he died, and he was buried in the Voree cemetery, but then
moved
to Burlington Cemetery. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where he's buried now.
And as we talked yesterday, also another issue with the islanders around on Lake Michigan near Beaver Island, there was a lot of timber on Beaver Island, and so they were selling wood to the steamers and the ships and stuff like that, and it was taking trade away from the other islanders, and so that made them upset with the Mormons as well.
Okay. And so so he was shot on the pier in Beaver Island, and then all the people from Beaver Island were scattered all over the shores of Lake Michigan.
Yeah. 2 days later.
Okay. And so did people kind of make their way back to Voree then?
No, they all went back to wherever the families that could take them in.
Okay.
I mean, there were some that did, but most of them went into Illinois, Iowa. Some people went over to Black River Falls in Wisconsin and started a branch. That was probably the biggest branch of the Strangites, was there at Black River Falls in Wisconsin. That's over near Minnesota.
Okay.
Kind of upper Wisconsin, but it's up near the Minnesota border.
Okay.
There was a branch there for quite some time, and then there was a branch here for a while, and then after a while, there was no one here. And then Wingfield Watson's ladies lived in Zion, Illinois, and they moved here, and they died here. But they were the granddaughters of Wingfield Watson, who was head of the church after L.D. Hickey, who was the last remaining alive apostle of James Strang, and Hickey also was part of Joseph Smith's church as well.
Okay. And so originally, so James Strang was the prophet, and then you had 12 apostles, but from what I understand, you didn't realize that the apostles had authority to call new apostles, and so they basically died out. Does that sound right to you?
Well, we believe that only the prophet can, through revelation, call an apostle. So even Brigham Young mentions this in the Times and Seasons, that when they're taking leadership of the church, he is saying that when all of us apostles die out, because we can't regenerate ourselves without a prophet, that the church will then be led by the high priest and elders.
Okay.
So he knew that they can't regenerate themselves at that time. That was his position. That's the way it was. Only a prophet could by revelation could have someone say that you're called to be an apostle.
Oh.
And we believe that the lesser cannot bless the greater or ordain the greater. So we can't make apostles because, like, I'm a high priest, but it's a lesser authority than an apostle. And so I can't make somebody a higher priesthood than what I hold.
Okay.
Less, but not greater.
Equal to or less, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're led by high priests now and elders, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, and so the prophet died out, the apostles have died out. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Gary Weber of the Strangite Church. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about women in priesthood. Okay, so you actually ordain women to the office of teacher.
Right. Well, a teacher can't ordain anybody or baptize anybody. Neither can a deacon for that.
Okay. So is that part of the Aaronic priesthood then?
Yeah.
So women do hold the Aaronic priesthood.
Yes. Yeah. And we believe that Emma was the first teacher.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.